Welcome to this podcast called Curious About Recovery. I am Kirsten Hunneyball. I am your host. And in this podcast, I'll be diving deep into eating disorders, which are complex and challenging to navigate. So whether you're a sufferer, a professional, a family or loved one of a sufferer, you can join me as I get curious by interviewing professionals, chatting to eating disorder survivors, and sharing my personal experience with an eating disorder so that you can better understand various perspectives, remove stigma, hear inspiring testimonies, and simply get curious about all things eating disorder related. I would like to put out a trigger warning. These episodes explore the topic of eating disorders, and some content may be triggering to listeners. Topics explored may mention, but are not limited to, trauma, diets, food and body types, suicide, mental illness, substance use, self-harm, violence, gender identification topics, and more. Please take care before listening to any episodes. It's important to note that this podcast is not aimed to diagnose, treat, or cure any form of mental illness and should not be seen as a replacement for treatment of eating disorders. Everything said here is expressed in relation to personal and professional opinions, and listeners should be encouraged to view these episodes as an open-minded exploration of various possibilities and perspective rather than hard facts and solutions. Please take what applies or resonates with you and leave the rest. And if you're struggling with an eating disorder, don't hesitate to reach out to me at kirsten@kirstenhuneyball.co.za. Today's episode is just an introduction as to why I'm here, why I decided to start what I have started, and just to let you get to know me a little bit better. My personal story and background is the fact that I struggled with bulimia, overexercise, and anorexia from probably about the age of 11. I came from a really supportive and loving family, and the thing that really inspired this podcast was this idea that we spend a lot of time trying to figure out why it is that we have eating disorders, for those of us who do, right? And what the best modalities or methods for recovery are, and how one should address recovery, what's working, what's not working. The thing that really interests me is the fact that so many people from so many different walks of life develop eating disorders. I think it's just such a difficult thing to speak about because there's so many complexities and there's so many layers. And like I said, I came from a really supportive and loving family. So, we talk about the fact that trauma is often the root of disordered behavior, and that maybe abuse or sexual trauma or something like that. And then there's the genetic disposition, and then there's the addictive personality, and then there's personality traits that are common in people with eating disorders. There's ADHD, there's OCD, there's anxiety, depression. There's all of these different things that kind of mesh together that are commonly seen in people with eating disorders, but not always seen. And so there's a lot to explore in the field of eating disorders. It's a very new area of study in the medical world. Up until a few years ago, it wasn't even considered an illness. People didn't even know what bulimia was. So my personal story obviously inspires the fact that I desire to get the word out there, raise awareness, let people know what's going on in the world of eating disorders, the latest modalities, the latest studies, the latest information, so that people can really start to understand themselves and their recovery journey holistically. And then we look at inspiring stories. So the way that this podcast will be structured is that we'll have solo episodes, which is just me sitting and talking to you and telling you about things that come to mind, my personal experience, thoughts about eating disorders and the food-body relationship, and maybe sometimes how I overcome those things. And those are just for you to kind of get into the inner workings of my brain and how recovery is played in my life. Then I'll have the professional episodes, which is where we dig into professional insights. So I'll interview a professional from all over the world on their area of expertise, whether it's a registered dietitian or a somatic therapist or even plant-based medicine. And then the last type of episode is personal stories. So these are places where you can actually feel inspired, where you can see what struggles people experienced and how they got through that. So if you are personally experiencing an eating disorder, you might be able to listen to that for some encouragement. And I'm even going to be talking to family members and loved ones so that we can get a really holistic perspective on this thing of eating disorders. And that's why this is called Curious About Recovery, because I kind of want to leave no stone unturned. I want to explore the nature of eating disorders, not to obsess about it or to fixate, but in order to really gain the best kind of understanding holistically that I can, and then hoping that that gets shared with you. And so I'm really passionate about raising awareness for eating disorders because of my personal journey and because I know how hard it is and I know how multi-layered and multifaceted it is. And I know how there is a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings, and there's a lot of conflict in families and relationships. And if I can really just speak to you about these things, you can explore your own journey in recovery, whether you're a professional, whether you're a loved one of a sufferer, or whether you are an individual who struggles with an eating disorder themselves. One of the things that I've recognized in my own personal journey is that the eating disorder that I developed tends to rear its ugly head when I do one very specific thing, and that is when I stop expressing myself fully, right? Whether it's my creative expression, or whether it's the ideas in my head, or whether it's standing up for myself, or whether it's telling someone how I honestly feel, or whether it's just getting vulnerable and letting someone in. And so, as a personal tool to my own recovery, I really have this feeling of just using my voice as a podcast host to express the thoughts that I have around eating disorders and to help other people express their thoughts and their opinions and their expertise. Eating disorders are still so frowned upon and misunderstood. There's so many people in the world that have this conception that it's a disease of vanity, and that people choose to slip into things like anorexia or binge eating or bulimia. And I believe that the more we speak about these things, the more people can be educated and understand. And therefore, the more we will be able to gather resources and effectively treat this really, really, really severe and very real illness. So you may find times where we're speaking about stuff that is eating disorder related, but maybe takes a little bit of a sidestep into something like borderline personality disorder, or something like relationships and how those integrate into being a person, because I think a lot of the time we isolate an eating disorder and we try to treat the behaviors of an eating disorder, the weight restoration, the food, all of that. And what we tend to forget is the fundamental element of our humanness and how important it is to navigate that holistically in order to find lasting change and lasting freedom from the grips of disordered eating. And so whether you're a professional wanting to find out more about different modalities and maybe some scientific evidence or anything like that, or whether you are an individual wanting some inspiration, or a family member, or even just a person who's curious about eating disorders as a subject, I really think that this podcast will help you just gain some curious perspectives about anything that has anything to do with disordered eating. I want this to be an explorative space, a curious space, an inspiring space, because at the end of the day, what I really hope to carry across is this idea that yes, recovery is possible. Yes, recovery is hella hard. It's really, really challenging to do. And yes, it's complicated. And there's not going to be one thing that fits everyone. There's so many different varieties and modalities, and every single person is unique and needs to be treated that way. Just letting you know a little bit about myself. Like I said, I am a recovery coach in South Africa. You can find my website at www.kirstenhuneyball.co.za. My Instagram is @KirstenHuneyball, and the Instagram page for this Curious About Recovery podcast is at Curious About Recovery. So there you'll find out about the episodes that are going to be released. So you can see if there's a topic that might interest you. Then you can just go to that episode and listen to it and share it if you enjoy it. And then just really important to put this disclaimer in, and I will be sharing this in every episode, is that this podcast aims to get curious. It doesn't aim to cure. It doesn't aim to be the be-all and end-all of a person's recovery journey. So I'm not saying that everything expressed here is hard facts. There may be some professionals who work in different sectors that might even contradict each other, but I'm wanting to get curious about all the modalities that there are out there and all the ways that you can find recovery. So this is not a replacement for any therapy or medication or any kind of healing process that you are going through professionally or medically, and should not be seen as a replacement for that. It only aims to supplement your curious nature so that you can learn more about eating disorder recovery. I also like to add that we need to place a trigger warning on this podcast specifically, because there are times where we are going to talk about stuff that could trigger an individual, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's dietary concerns, whether it's perspectives that you might not agree with. So just be warned that if you are going to listen to this podcast, you do need to do it with an open mind, and you do need to do it with caution, because I don't want to be triggering people out there. I only want to be helping. And that's really, really what I hope to get out of this. So with that, I would like to let you know how you could help. If you would like to help this podcast, I do accept donations. You're more than welcome to email me. How you can help is that you can share this podcast, your favorite episodes, the information that you find, and sharing even the people that I interview, just sharing as much as you can. As much as we can get this out there, as much as we can educate people and inform people and inspire people, that's really what I hope to achieve with this podcast. So other ways you can help is you can write a review, which would be really great. And I'd love to know what suggestions you have, what things you agree with, what you don't agree with, because I am just as curious as you are, and I'm always willing to learn. I'm always willing to grow. And I'm jumping in with this podcast because it feels like something worth doing. So forgive me if I don't always get it right, but what the intention is behind this is to really just help you navigate your personal recovery or your professional career. So with that, thank you so much, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. If you have liked it, share it with people who you think might benefit from listening to it as well. Don't forget to go to my Instagram page called @CuriousAboutRecovery to find out about upcoming episodes or to browse the episodes of the past. You can also follow my page called @Kirsten Hunneyball, where you can get inspiration for your eating disorder recovery.